Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, what day is it again? It's Thursday, March 28, 2019. Time for another show. I've been reading up on what the hell's happening in the world in order to try to bring you the same news. We're short on time in terms of coming up with news because Daily Coast Radio is live now. Kagro X is your host. That's according to Bill in Portland, Maine. I don't know that I'm necessarily agreed to do this, but that's what it says in the tweet, and so I guess we should go ahead with it. Oh, clearly, I just realized what I did yesterday. Remember yesterday when my beginning of my show was interrupted briefly by the Get to Know Your Mac prompt from our new, fantastic Kagro in the Morning MacBook Pro laptop, courtesy of all of you who donate to help support the show. Thanks very much. We're able to, and so it hasn't solved any problems because it keeps getting in my way. And I guess what I must have clicked on, it's Get to Know Your Mac, show. You should just show it to me. We should all learn about the new Mac. But I clicked later and I must have said, remind me tomorrow. And guess what time tomorrow must be the default. Well, I do want to be reminded to do it, but I want to be reminded to do it later, and not all of the little pop-up messages let you select try again tonight like they did with the updates. Okay, I wanted to grab this news flying by. I just thought this was kind of interesting. Watching people retweet the news from Senator Michael Bennet. All it says here is he tells Joe NBC, that'd be Morning Joe, I'm very inclined to do it, which I think most people are, and it's sort of an instinct. But I think he's talking about running for president, which is too bad because I'm very inclined to do it I want to hear from senators is I'm very inclined to, let's say, continue to vigorously investigate the Trump administration and or maybe impeach him. It's interesting, not because I expected Michael Bennet to do it, not because I particularly want senators to come out now and say, yes, I'm interested in impeaching, because I'm only interested if Republicans are going to say that. Otherwise, I hope you are at least quietly willing to consider that. But I just found it interesting in the sense of nobody that I know, and I know a small circle of people, but nobody I know, nobody I've even seen on Twitter, really. And I don't know a lot of those people. I know them casually, some I don't know at all. I've never seen anybody, never heard anybody say what I want out of life today. I could die happy, for instance, if Michael Bennet would run for president. That would satisfy me. I'm unhappy with the 350,000 people already running. Michael Bennet brings something to the table that no one else does. I've got to have Michael Bennet on the ballot in order to be satisfied with my life. Whereas, on the other hand, people do actually say that about impeachment. I just find it interesting. I don't think they're equivalent or anything like that. And I don't require that, he come out in favor of impeachment at all. It's interesting to me what people say, they want to say out loud to others. I'm thinking of running for president. I don't give a good goddamn that you do. Congratulations. Maybe I'll even like you enough to vote for you. But who cares, quite honestly? Just do it already. Here, I'm very inclined to do it. Who cares? Go. Whereas millions are clamoring for news about what the hell we're going to do about this idiot in the White House, if anything. And you could announce that and people would get excited about it. But instead, I guess you want to talk to Morning Joe. That's what you're going to talk about. Not a big deal in terms of, how lousy a candidate he might be. Not a big deal about news being made. I just find it kind of interesting. But only a little bit. So we'll move on from there. There's many things also being circulated this morning, some of which require immediate attention, some of which are getting immediate attention but don't require it. People talking about a new piece in the New York Times, which I understand is a very prestigious newspaper, and I'm pretty sure I don't think you can bribe your way into it, but they're talking about the college bribery scandal, and in particular about Olivia Jade, whatever her name is. Is it like Giannulli or something like that? And Amanda Hess has a very interesting piece, much talked about what underlies all of this, and a very interesting take on it. And I see a lot of people raising their eyebrows about it and tweezing their eyebrows and then raising them about this story. People don't bribe college officials to help their kids, says Amanda. They do it to help themselves. And the gist of this particularly hot take, and it's a good one, there's good hot takes and there's bad hot takes, and this one seems to be going over pretty well, is that the top colleges in this country are a bit of a branding exercise, both for themselves and for the people who go there. The idea being that very often wealthy people who can go to these schools, by the way, have you taken a look at the price tag on some of these schools lately? I have, because I have kids getting ready to go to college. Very often, the thesis being here that wealthy people will, as she puts it, whitewash their privilege by running it through an elite school. Why is it so important to somebody who's already got it made in life? And their kids, therefore, have got it made in life for the most part, because that's the way our system seems to work. You can pass on all your money and there's no taxes because some reason. And for all those folks who might have an attack of conscience once in a while, or worry that other people will attack them for having no conscience or something, what you do is you make sure that your kid can go to an elite school, or that you can go to an elite school, or that you're well regarded at an elite school. And then somehow the idea is that our societal high regard for that elite school will turn your kid into a meritocratic achiever and not just a rich parent hanger-on. It's not that you were born into a rich family and stayed rich. It's you deserve it. You, after all, went to Harvard. I don't know exactly what they thought they were going to generate by sending Olivia Jade to wherever she was going. I think was it USC or UCLA? I mean, prestigious, no doubt, but I don't know. I don't know what they thought they were buying for her. And I don't know if anybody was worrying about, well, I don't know if Olivia Jade is smart enough to XYZ. But anyway, sub-thesis of the story, actually, an interesting tweet from the author saying, when the ironic part of all of this, I guess, is that she admits in one of her videos, I don't care about college. I never wanted to go in the first place. Don't know how often I'll attend school. But the irony of the piece being, or as she puts it, the craziest thing about this whole gambit is that a girl like Olivia Jade did not even want or need to go to college, and buying her way in doing so, her parents have destroyed the one career she actually legitimately was very good at, YouTube influencing. Now, of course, she looks like a total fraud. I don't know. That might be exciting to a YouTube audience. They're teenage kids. They might be in on the joke and think it's hilarious that she bribed her way into college. I don't know what they thought how they thought she came by this influencing career in the first place. Maybe they never thought about it that deeply. I don't think Michael Bennett has thought about running for president that deeply either. So, I don't know. Somehow a weird linkage between the two stories. You can bribe your way into anything, I guess. Greg, good morning. How are you? You want to bribe me?
Good morning. I had always assumed that Olivia Jade wanted to go to USC because they have a pretty good film school.
Well, that would have been a good idea, but apparently she wasn't interested in that. I thought she might.
Well, she wasn't interested in anything, but no. I thought that was kind of the idea.
Yeah. Oh well, that's part of the affect, I guess. That's part of the article too. Is that she wants to be. She's aiming at teenagers who like to talk about how much they don't care about anything.
Right.
So,
I'm just saying that that particular school, the USC School of Cinematic Arts, and it was USC, not UCLA, has been ranked among the best in the world.
I'm sure it is.
And so if you're talking about the article and the idea that, it's a prestige school, it's a prestige film school.
Okay. I mean, I just thought, usually people who don't think about things very deeply, maybe this is evidence that she had thought about it or her parents had. They could have bought their way into an Ivy, but
but if she wants to be a YouTube star and basically is doing film, you might as well go to a film school.
So they might have said the parents there might have been at least partially connected to the world and say, well, we can bribe you into anywhere. This one makes the most practical sense. You should be in film.
We actually can't bribe you into anywhere. You're kind of an idiot, but we can get you here.
That's a possibility. I had the impression that she had selected her school as a backdrop for her YouTubing and Instagramming, and that USC had the look she wanted. But either way, I mean, it made a good amount of sense for her, and also they may have thought, we don't really want her so far away and completely out of our control. Maybe they ought to be able to pick her up and grab her and take her home.
Right. Anyway, so there's that. I'm just saying that her being there doesn't necessarily destroy the narrative of the Amanda Hess piece.
No, I think it's that's right. I didn't think that there was anything less prestigious necessarily about USC, but I wondered, for
everybody
instance,
else
why
did.
they didn't.
I mean, the first reaction when they heard that was like, if you can bribe your way in anywhere, why'd you pick USC?
Yeah, well,
you want to go to jail for USC?
My thought was it was just close to home, but I guess film school, if she had been interested in going, that might have been nice.
And again, that may have been her parents deciding that given what her proclivities are, maybe she should go to film school. I didn't ask her.
That's true, and I don't know what the point of asking her would be.
Remember, these are helicopter parents with real helicopters.
Yeah. So, all right, that's the one they decided on, and I figured she likes, sitting outside and tanning, and the Ivies aren't great for that.
So anyway, let's talk about what else is going on here. I have three broad categories of things that I thought were kind of collected. First is, of course, fallout from the Barr Gambit.
Okay.
Which was to make a lot of noise and claim that Trump won everything and he's like elected to president of the universe.
That's what I heard.
Completely exonerated victory lap. And then hope that everybody moves on to other stories and that's the only thing they remember. While it turns out that 2 or 3 days later, people are saying, oh, wait a minute, this actually isn't the Mueller report. We haven't seen the Mueller report yet.
Oh.
And there's been 5 polls out since then. None of them, or collectively, you might say all of them, showing there's really been no bounce at all for Trump. In fact, in the Real Clear Politics numbers, he's actually gone down a little bit. It's interesting that the one polling change, maybe it's too soon to pick this up. Well, no, because there's an enormous polling change. Robert Mueller is now popular with Republicans. He gained like 42 points in one of the polls.
All right, well, that's good for him. He can go to any college he wants.
But in that same poll, I can't remember which one it is. I think that came out yesterday. It may have been the CNN poll.
It's the Q poll.
In that same poll,
QAnon poll,
Trump didn't change. So, you have all of that. You have a lot of people talking about the fact that we're really not sure what's going on. So, of course, Trump does what Trump does, which is to say, let's change the subject. Let's get rid of Obamacare. And I was looking at this and trying to tie it into my third story, which is Brexit. And I'm thinking, Trump trying to do a Brexit for Obamacare is going to be winding up the same way as Brexit in the UK right now.
Yeah,
which is to say everybody's pointing fingers at each other, and May has to resign, Theresa May, the prime minister. And, I couldn't figure out how come she hasn't resigned up until now.
I don't know.
She's a very stubborn person. This may sound familiar. And I was trying to think of analogies to try to explain what was going on with Brexit. So in the first segment of the show, I'm actually going to try to do that. I have this really interesting article here from the UK on indicative voting.
Indicative voting.
Indicative voting. Indicative of what you want to do. What happened?
Certainly indicative, I can tell you that.
Yeah, what happened is nobody could figure out what to do. And Theresa May said, well, I have an idea. My non-workable plan is the plan because I decided I've had 3 years to work on it. It's terrible, but it's the only one we have. And I'm a conservative and the Tories have the majority. So I'm going to push it through. And the vote failed.
Okay.
And she said, well, I have a better idea. I'm going to push the same vote through. And it failed. And then she said, all right, I have an even better idea. I have the same vote, the same policy. I'm going to push it through again. And the the speaker in the Commons said, I found a 149-year-old precedent that says you can't unless you change the vote somehow.
That's relatively
So
young.
everybody got really frustrated, and the MP said, this is terrible. The deadline's looming. We don't know what to do. Labor is divided, the opposition, and we're divided. And so it's kind of like, you have to imagine the House with a Republican majority, okay? And the House Freedom Caucus, the Brexiteers in this case, are a majority of the majority, but not a majority of the House. So by themselves, they can't pass anything. But they're by far the biggest faction, and they're almost in agreement as to what to do.
Okay.
The rest of the Republicans, unlike in the U.S., are feisty and actually will vote against the House Freedom Caucus. They're kind of like our dream of what a moderate Republican should be, but aren't.
All right. Yep.
So if the House Freedom Caucus pulled out, let's just repeal Obamacare, the moderates in the House would say, that's a stupid idea. I'm not going to vote for that.
Yeah.
And the Democrats might vote as a bloc, except they're Democrats, and so they don't. And so some of them want to vote with the House Freedom Caucus because if you do something terrible, then maybe Jill Stein will get elected. I don't know. Or the whole thing will collapse, and then you could do single payer. This is where the analogy gets a little strained, but because labor isn't really an analogy to the Democrats. But let's just pretend that the fractious Democrats are arguing between the Socialist Democrat faction that wants to push single payer and will vote whatever is disruptive in order to get there. And then you have the moderate Democrats saying, that's crazy. You can't do that to the country. That hurts people. And so the Democrats don't agree in this theoretical analogy, and the Republicans don't agree in this theoretical analogy. And so you have 6 or 7 or 8 healthcare plans on the table, and there's no majority for any of them, any one of them. And unlike the U.S., the House of Commons stepped back and said, you know what? Why don't we just take all the different choices, Medicare for all, Medicare for America, leaving the Affordable Care Act as is, repealing the Affordable Care Act, and maybe, the old, from 4 or 5 years ago plans about moving healthcare off of employment-based insurance. And we'll just put all 6 or 7 or 8 of them on the table, and we'll vote on each one successively, and we'll see which one is more popular.
We have something like that
on the same day.
Here. Yeah.
Right? We'll just take 8 votes.
It can happen.
It did happen there. So that's what happened.
Okay.
And they did that, and that's what their indicative votes were.
Indicative. I see.
It was indicative of what the majority actually thought. Okay? And so what happened is the hard Brexit was rejected. Labour's soft Brexit with some tinkering for the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland failed. The hardline Brexit failed really hard. No deal, let's just leave and whatever happens, lost by 160 votes. And the other thing that you could do is you could say, okay, we sent a letter citing Article 50 in the European Union that said that we're leaving. Why don't we revoke that? Why don't we just change our position and say, you know what, we're not Brexiting.
Okay.
That lost too, by a lot. That revocation plan was defeated 184 to 293. But the one that got the most votes and the one that came the closest to almost passing was the one that said, why don't we take another vote? Let's do the people's vote. Let's go back and do that. And although that didn't quite get a majority, it came awfully close to getting a majority.
Okay.
In fact, the second vote was 268 to 295. There were a bunch of other things in there, trying to stay within the customs union of the European Union while claiming that we're separate. That actually did okay too, but the idea of just leaving failed in the 3 or 4 iterations it was put up. And the things that were the most popular is trying to work with the European Union or just let's go have a second vote and see what's going on.
All right.
That's what they're left with. So Theresa May said, well, this parliamentarian taking over our government instead of listening to my ideas, which keep failing, is horrible. And you all are traitors for trying to do that. But I walk that back. I'm sorry I said that. I'll tell you what. Why don't you pass my plan that you've all rejected? And if you do that, I'll resign. Oh,
that might be attractive.
So trying to make it attractive by threatening to resign is basically her last card.
Cool.
You don't have anything after that. And the problem with that is, while it's really attractive to think of Theresa May resigning because she made a mess of this, as they say, a pig's breakfast. But
do they?
But the problem is that doesn't solve any of the problems.
That is a problem.
The real problem is they have to figure out what to do with Brexit and what their true relationship is with the European Union.
Yes.
And just changing leadership doesn't do it. They could put a hardline Brexiteer in there, and they still don't have majority support for leaving. And the people still want to stay, although, it's a close vote. And so they're kind of screwed no matter what they do. Unfortunately, for Labor, the Labor Party is so screwed up that they're not much of an alternative, and people pretty much hate them. That's what's going on in Britain. So to me, when I look at Donald Trump saying, okay, listen, while you guys are distracted by the Barr letter, which isn't the Mueller report that I handpicked in order to make it sound better than perhaps it actually was, not by lying, but by omitting things that might be in the otherwise large report. How large is the report? We don't know. They won't say how many pages there are. Why won't they say how many pages there are? Because when the report finally comes out, if it was a 1,500-page report and you get 700 pages, you know there's some redactions.
Right. So everything is a secret.
Everything's a secret. And so, forget about that. I think what we should do is we should Brexit from Obamacare. How about that, guys? Isn't that a great idea? And Republicans turned on this and said, what are you doing? That's horrible. I mean, the stories that come from that.
Yeah. Oh, they're right.
WTF is wrong with them. Republicans horrified as Trump goes after Obamacare again. From Politico, this one is we need a plan. GOP shaken by Trump's health care demands. As one Senate aide put it in this CNN report, we're waiting with eagerness the White House Chief of Staff's proposal on health care reform that brings to Republicans the consensus that has otherwise eluded us for over a decade. I think I detect a bit of sarcasm in that.
Yes.
I don't know how eager they are to see it.
No, and it's not – I don't know how elusive it's really been. It's just never been anywhere close to them. So
that's right, and it's impossible. And there's some really excellent pieces on that. Perhaps the best one in the last couple of days is from all people Peter Suderman, the libertarian, writing in the Washington Post. Trump keeps promising great health care. The GOP still doesn't have a plan. And the problem is they keep trying for easy promises over grappling with hard trade-offs. And anytime you do health care, there have to be trade-offs, and Republicans don't want to deal with that. They just want to say, okay, we'll replace. But when you ask them what they want, it's like the Brexiteers in the UK. Great. They don't know what they want. There is nothing close to a consensus as to what they want. And so they can't pass anything. You cannot have a complete redoing of Obamacare that gets rid of pre-existing conditions that's going to be acceptable to the public. And you can't have something that keeps pre-existing conditions that doesn't look something like Obamacare, which is a conservative proposal, and that's how it was originally put together.
Yeah.
So they're stuck. They can't do this. And so what does Trump do? Trump says, okay, let's do this. In fact, I'm going to make you do this.
Yeah. Okay.
And they're running. And they're running from it. Even Kevin McCarthy told Trump this is a really bad idea and we don't want to do this. It divides the conference.
Yes.
You have the House Freedom Caucus again saying, okay, let's just get rid of anything. We don't care if you don't have health insurance. It's not our problem. The whole idea is not to have government run health care. So we are totally for this. Mm-hmm. And the rest of the Republican conference is saying, no, we got clobbered on this in 2018. We want to be able to go to the American public and say, Bernie Sanders is a socialist.
They can do
and that's all you need to know. He has a terrible health plan. He's a socialist. Stop. Right there. That's our plan. That's our health care plan. And now you've put this on the table, and you're making us come up with something.
Oh.
We hate that. We're going to have to learn it and then go sell it. And then, by God, we're going to have to vote on it. It's going to be on record. And when you get close to doing stuff like that, there were, you keep talking about Russia, 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 Russia. You're the one talking about it, not Democrats, Republicans are telling him. Out on the trail in 2018, the only thing that Democrats talked about was taking away your pre-existing conditions. And we got killed. We got clobbered. We lost seats. We lost the House. And look what you're doing to us. And Trump says, I'm a honey badger. I don't care.
Right. Well, to him, it works to simply go out there and say, the plan is we're going to do something great. So why not do that? And I
That's
guess
all
it
I
doesn't
need.
work in the
You guys
districts.
do the details. I don't do
Maybe
details. That's your problem. That's not my problem.
Right.
And Republicans are looking at him and saying, hey.
Yeah.
Now, meanwhile, while all of this is going on, of course, Betsy DeVos wants to get the Special Olympics. And the weird thing about it is that was a proposal that wasn't going to go anywhere because it wasn't going to happen like many budget suggestions. But they made it into a big issue by being so stupid about it. So they're relitigating health care, as Politico puts it this morning, gutting the Special Olympics, nominating Stephen Moore to the Federal Reserve Board, who doesn't know anything about anything, declaring war on Puerto Rico.
Yes.
And, gee, what a great week, and it's only Thursday.
Yeah, well, that's the end of the week for those guys. So they wrapped it up.
You don't even remember the Barr report.
What now? What was that? I can't remember. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot going on. I saw an interesting theory about this Special Olympic thing. Maybe we'll revisit that when we come back from our break.
Okay.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on it. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and I'm still scrolling to see if I can find Dana Hoole's theory on what was going on, but I can certainly give you the basics of his thoughts about the DeVos thing. Here it is. Folks are blaming DeVos about the Special Olympics. She has a responsibility for it because it's her department, but reminder, and people did know this, but they dismissed it for various reasons. She donated part of her past salary checks as department head to the Special Olympics. In other words, she's a personal supporter through, to quote unquote charitable giving to the Special Olympics. That doesn't by itself exonerate her, of course. Lots of people are, hypocritical about things like that, or give some pittance versus how much they have tied up in yachts and summer homes. But whatever. The point, though, was that he didn't think that it was really, while it's fine to tear down Betsy DeVos, and nobody's going to stand in the way of that, to lay the blame on her in this sense. He says, Trump has obsessions he keeps returning to, and he cruelly mocks people with disabilities. I think this was an order directly from Trump. DeVos primarily targets people, populations, programs, or organizations that offend her version of Christianity. It's not saying here that she couldn't target the Special Olympics, but it's not her typical kind of target. In fact, it's perceived as apolitical and isn't a Republican versus Dem kind of organization. And yeah, one would think the Special Olympics is something the rabidly anti-abortion crowd, like DeVos, would want to keep strong. It's something they very often point to as an anti-abortion argument. Well, they are convinced that there are legions of people aborting children who have a Down syndrome prognosis or something like that, and promoting Special Olympics and other organizations focused on the mentally disabled is a backdoor way for them to actually promote their anti-abortion views. And it's in all likelihood, though, and this part would make a lot more sense, or makes the most sense, is the idea that Betsy DeVos actually did her homework and studied the budget and made a recommendation to make this cut is near zero. It's in fact probably something that either came from Trump or Mulvaney or somewhere else. And while nobody's going to stop you from tearing Betsy DeVos apart if you have the opportunity to do it, it may be coming from elsewhere. And I thought that was pretty solid thinking, if not provable, well, at least not proven to the moment. This moment. Provable, yeah. We might get Trump to blurt it out on TV later and then deny he said it.
So Roy Blunt, I guess this is from chair of the U.S. Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Labor, Health, and Human Services, Education and Related Agencies. Shelby is the chair of the Appropriations Committee. But I think the subcommittee is important for this. And I say that because Roy Blunt is a big Special Olympics supporter. In fact, I think he went to Abu Dhabi for the last Special Olympics.
Really?
So the idea that, and he just said, this is stupid and it's dead on arrival. I don't remember his exact words, but basically that's what he said.
That's another frequently heard refrain about dumb things that end up in the president's budget. Doesn't mean anything. And DOA
so it wasn't going anywhere. But then it just, it just got worse because it was such a stupid thing to do that it, again, is one of those things that's loud enough to step on his victory lap message.
Yeah. Well, kudos to whoever dug that out. And it made a good narrative in terms of cutting a worthy charity's funding under the department of somebody with, 10 yachts.
Right. So meanwhile, this Quinnipiac poll comes out this morning.
Yes.
And says Joe Biden's on top of the Democratic presidential pack. Most voters say they definitely won't vote for Trump. That was the part that I took from it. 53% of Americans say they definitely will not vote for Trump in the 2020 general election if he's a Republican candidate. 30% say they definitely will. That's a pretty big margin. 13% said they'll consider it. So 53-43, I wouldn't mind that result if that's what we get. 77% of Republicans definitely voting for Trump. I think it's a relatively low number. 1% of Democrats, I think it's a relatively high number. And 21% of independent voters. So that is not particularly good for him. And Nick Gorovich, a Democratic pollster, pointed out, good thing we have 18 to 34-year-olds in this country. 68% of them say they will definitely not vote for Trump.
Okay.
And so the question always is, that's nice, will they show up? And Tom Bonnier has numbers that are encouraging. While youth turnout surged massively across the board in 2018, the biggest increases came in urban areas, whereas in prior elections there wasn't much of a variation in youth turnout based on urban versus rural. So that's all pretty encouraging. And, right now, Trump is not on track for re-election. And this William Barr gambit just doesn't seem to be working as far as I can tell. There have been big shifts in the a cloud lifted stuff that came out on Monday. And by Thursday, it's, well, how many pages is the Mueller report? When are we going to see it? Nadler's talking to Barr, and there's an agreement that the Judiciary Committee will see it. When is unclear. They've asked for it in a week. Barr said it's too long. You can't have it in a week. You will have it within weeks, but not months. There may be part of it that need to be redacted. We're going over that. The White House says that they want the whole thing released and there's not going to be any executive privilege. And, of course, they don't want the whole thing released and there will be executive privilege. So we don't know how that's going to work.
Right.
I mean, you can pretty much bet the opposite of what they're saying. But that's the discussion. And then, why the Barr memo is insufficient. And here are all of the things that have been left out, so on and so forth. And, it's not the winning shot that Trump thought. So he thought he'd distract with health care. That's not the winning shot. He's not getting very good press on that. Mm-hmm. So, of course, what he decided to do this morning is tweet that the media is failing. And by the way, Jesse Smollett, look at that. Squirrel.
Important. Although, that's an interesting story. Not exactly my kind of interesting story, but it was interesting to see it shift. People get whiplash. If you watch too closely, you'll get hurt.
Right. I mean, as Armando points out, it's really hard to know what Barr is promising because there's other reports saying the department. We talked about this yesterday on the show. Yeah. Department of Justice might be writing their own summary rather than the report itself.
Right.
But there's so much interest in the report. Poll after poll after poll after poll shows the American people want to see this report. Yeah, the idea of writing summaries and just summaries of summaries and then super summaries and then summary of summaries, it's not going to fly. It's not what people want.
Yeah, that may be all you get. I mean,
well, then it's cover up.
Yeah,
and then you run on. Trump wants to take away your health care, and he's covering up what Mueller actually said.
Well,
that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, we already got that. So it's we're going to see whether we can maintain that kind of focus.
We don't right now.
Yeah, we do.
The Barr thing is being played as a political gambit to delay what the Mueller report says.
Yeah, but that's
if you actually deny the report, then it becomes cover up. That's not where we're at now, but that's where we're heading if they do this.
That is, I'm thinking. To me, we're just in the beginning stages of it's going to be the same thing. The absolutely. Barr report will become a larger Barr report, and then we'll say that's not it, and he'll say, oh yeah, hold on a second, and then he'll bring another one. That's not it. Hold on, I'll bring you the real Mueller report. That again, that's not it. We're getting very frustrated. This is very angry. My strongly worded letter to you. I'm very upset with you. And it's getting to be near the election, so hurry up, because if you don't give us what we want before the election, we won't be able to clobber you. Oh, why did I say that?
Well, as Pelosi said this morning, Nancy Pelosi, it's arrogant of Barr to expect the Democrats would blindly accept his summary. Yes. They won't. They don't need the report at this point. The public already thinks that Trump colluded, according to the polls, and the public already thinks that he's obstructed, according to the polls. Right. Actually, one could argue Trump needs the report more than the Democrats do because he's got to, show that he really was exonerated.
Exactly.
That's not going to happen because that's not what the report's going to show.
Right. Now, Trump needs it more than anyone, so that means he's not going to give it to us because
it doesn't say what he wants it to say.
And he's
so again, if you're looking at it from a political point of view, what's done is done. And, if they want to delay trying to get information, then call them out, run on that, and then, pound them on health care.
Okay.
And guess what? You know what that sounds like? 2018.
Yeah, which isn't bad,
which isn't a bad result.
I would also like to know what the hell happened. But okay, we're not gonna. So get ready for running against Trump and his party for continuing to obstruct justice. That's the platform.
That's the platform. Plus, he's trying to take away your health care. If you win on that,
he can.
You're going to find out what was in that Mueller report.
Yeah, and you'll get your health care. So
and you get your health care. So that's not a bad deal.
Yeah.
Right?
If you find out what's in there, you'll get to keep your doctor. I don't know will that work?
Get to keep your president.
Yes. Okay. Well, right.
Right. If you like your president, you can keep your president. But the only way that's going to happen is, release the report or the president wins the re-election. And he's not on track for that right now. No. Oh, by the way, the economy is slowing.
Oh, what's that?
The economy? Or slowing.
Okay. People are talking about that to a certain extent. Things developing. We learned about the rate flip the other day, or the rate inversion. So that's our indicator. Now everybody's talking about it, even though nobody understood.
Well, there's more than that. I mean, there's more. Heads of companies are talking about investing less. The Fed is not raising interest rates anymore. There's a number of soft indicators out there that things are slowing, and it's likely that in the next iteration, the growth for 2018 is going to be ratcheted down a little bit, and projections for 2019 are also going to be ratcheted down. And so Trump may want Stephen Moore on the Federal Reserve Board because he's pushing for 4% growth, an impossibility that Trump promised, by eliminating interest rates altogether for everybody and also giving everybody a unicorn and a pony. But, these are all, shall we say, clouds gathering, and I don't think any clouds have been lifted on what's going on right now. That's pretty much a summary. The three big stories there, again, are Trump on healthcare, the Barr gambit and how that's playing, and what's going on with Brexit. And so I'll leave that summary with you, and you get to talk about whatever it is you want to talk about now without me interrupting.
Right. Well, I don't know. I'll see what we can come up with. Okay.
I'll
Very
listen to
good.
the show and find out. That's the fun part. I never know what you're going to talk
Right. I should turn this off and listen, and I'll know.
Excuse me. I'll be back in a half hour. I got to read.
Yeah, I have no plan for exiting, but we should just do it and then see what comes on the radio.
Yeah,
I'm going to
absolutely.
Brexit this whole thing. Okay.
This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my good friend David Waldman. Kagro in the morning. Thanks for listening, folks. And he'll continue and be back tomorrow. I'll be back on Monday, and we'll do it again.
Okay. Or will you? Isn't it April Fool's Day Monday?
Is it?
We got. I think so.
I hope,
have to look that up.
One of the things I hate
Pretty
about
sure.
being online on April
Yes.
Fools
Yes.
is April Fools.
Right. That's
Like,
the worst
usually
thing
I'm
about
just
the
in
day.
no mood for
It's
ha.
a day.
I punked you,
Right. Especially for dumb things like.
especially for news.
Oh yes. Well, those are all, and it's very difficult in the
Trump
Trump era.
resigns. Ha ha. April Fools.
Yeah, well, that's a bad
Shut
one.
up.
Obviously. I just don't like the ones that are totally plausible, and then you just say, "Oh no, kidding, I made that up." Well, that wasn't funny or interesting. But what's totally plausible in this era is very scary, so it's doubly troubling.
What was funny, is this. They should have saved this for April 1st, but The Onion had a piece about NASA unveiling new flirty spacesuits for women. They like the regular spacesuit from the waist up, but they were short skirts and go-go boots.
I see. Okay, like a Halloween costume, sexy
Yeah,
astronaut.
it was really quite amusing. The idea that they didn't have enough spacesuits for women and they were planning a female spacewalk is kind of dumb.
Yeah, I mean,
You should have known you didn't have enough spacesuits before you planned the walk. No.
well, yeah, you would think. Although, quite honestly, I could see where they could
these
plan
things don't
this
just
thing and say,
happen.
"This is a great idea. We should do this." And I mean, I could see people at NASA, then getting the news, "Oh, we don't have enough spacesuits." What? Are you kidding? I mean, I didn't even think to count. Do we have enough spacesuits? Because of course we do. And if we don't, what do? We make more.
Well,
we don't have any
as soon
rockets
as you suggest
either.
that, somebody actually in the field, in the trenches, so to speak, should have said, "You can't do that," and then you don't announce it.
Yeah, I mean, you would think if things were operating normally, I suppose you'd think they do check their facts from time to time at NASA. That's true, but I don't know. They were probably busy calculating. Are we sure that the rocket is going to go where we want? There's so many factors, so much complicated math, and nobody said we might not have spacesuits. That's not usually on their list, which is a very important point because it's not on their list because they've never run out of spacesuits because the astronauts are always men and they got an endless supply, I guess. But how do I don't understand, like, make suits. What do you mean? How long could that take?
Yeah, I mean, just, sit down in the sewing machine and just, do it.
Beam them up. Don't they have that technology? Use the
Not yet.
replicator.
Not yet.
All right. Yeah. Well, they'll work on it, I'm sure.
Okay. Alrighty. So,
I mean, this is literally the same. We put a man on the moon. We can't make a spacesuit. These are the guys who said who put the guy on the moon. This is crazy. All right. Well, you have the weekend to work on it, Greg.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do here. Take care, and I'll see you Monday.
You do the same. All right. Or will you? Yes, that's right. I assume we'll do a show. The kids are going to be off from school tomorrow as well, so you'll hear them. Well, you hear one of them in the background. As I said, one of them getting ready to go to college, and so you're not likely to hear him. Unless he's getting up to complain about the cost of attending college these days, which is a very big topic, not just for me, but for like all the rest of you as well. But certainly on my radar. Certainly more so these days than ever before. And I will just say there's a cloud that hasn't been lifted in the KITM World Headquarters. I'm sad that it looks like it's going to be the case that although we're very proud our son was able to get into our alma mater. My wife and I both attended Lafayette College. We always thought, what a great backup that is, to be able to apply to a selective school with the added bonus of both your parents being alums, and you would, I think, unless that's an urban myth about the legacy admissions, that's a leg up, right? But it does you almost no good when you get the details and find out that attending the school is about 3 times more expensive than it was when we went, and that with room and board and books and other incidental fees that they imagine you will incur, it's running north of, which is in the northern hemisphere, would you say, higher than, north of $70,000, $72,000 plus dollars, and I guess with incidentals it could bump up against $75,000 a year, which is like unjustifiable. And I imagine that's the number because most of the people who go, and I think it is actually, most are on, get some sort of financial aid out of it. And it doesn't look like that was forthcoming, though. So, yeah, it's kind of sad that I don't know. I didn't really necessarily envision him there, but I guess I was thinking about the possibility, and I thought that was sort of heartwarming. But $75,000 a year is kind of heart-stopping, so I guess that probably won't happen unless they're listening at Lafayette College and then decide to cut tuition immediately or something. I don't know. It's too bad. It's a sad thing, but we have, but it's a minor point because it's not on his radar. For him, he's excited about the prospects of where he can go, and that's the way it needs to be. I vent here because I don't want to tell him that. But not that he would care. Anyway, who knows? He would care. He just wouldn't show it. So let's see. What other things can we pick up on? I think we've made the point with respect to the Barr report, although I imagine we'll have much more to say about that as we read through what's on Pocket. I don't think we're going to spend any time on Olivia Jade and what's going on here. Although, again, I do recommend to you the piece by Amanda Hess. Everybody seems to be enjoying it and seems to be making a very interesting and salient point about how the wealthy will use their wealth and power to whitewash their otherwise underachieving or non-achieving kids by sending them to a place that's supposed to, if all goes well, this is not happening for Olivia Jade, I don't think, but supposed to issue you a diploma from an elite school, and then people say, well, of course that person is wealthy and successful. They graduated from elite school A, and I can tell that by the fact that they have this diploma, and that's why they're wealthy and successful, not because of any other anti-meritocratic or otherwise garbage that they were just handed a bunch of money by their parents, or do something stupid for a living that we don't really need, like being a YouTube influencer. And I think I'm willing to tar them broadly. YouTube influencers, why not? Unless I get a piece of that action, in which case it's awesome. How about that? Okay. In other news, let's see. Shall we spend a moment on this one? This is just sort of somewhat interesting for those of us who continue following the gun stories in our country. And hold on a second, got to get rid of, well, let's see, what pop-up is this? Go away, you. All right, Vice, which is full of pop-ups and large ones at that, reports the good guy with a gun theory debunked. Alex Yablon is our reporter on this one. And we can give just a brief summary of this. Analyzing 37 years of data, a Stanford team, and that's a prestigious school, and some of the team may have bribed their way in, but it's okay because they give us a good theory here. A Stanford team finds no basis for a theory at the heart of the modern gun rights movement. It should come as no surprise to you that the theory is debunked. They just had some other interesting points to make about the origin of the theory and the purpose of the theory that I thought was perhaps worth spending a few minutes on. In the 4 decades that the modern militant gun rights movement has been around, one of the most significant victories occurred not at the ballot box, on a president's special signing desk, or in the courtroom. Rather, well, it did actually happen in the courtroom. Rather, one of the biggest battles pro-gun partisans have ever won took place in the minds of millions of Americans, which I think helped drive the fact that they were able to make those victories in the courtroom possible. Since the late 1970s, the National Rifle Association and other firearms advocates have successfully fought to make armed self-defense increasingly acceptable in everyday life. A wealth of survey data, the most recent of which came via a major Pew poll released last month, shows that Americans have grown more comfortable with the toting of concealed guns in public. Self-defense is now the most common reason cited for owning a firearm, leading handguns to become the most popular kind of weapon in the American arsenal. Those attitudes and behaviors mark major shifts. In the mid-1990s, Americans primarily owned guns. This is an important point. In the mid-1990s, Americans primarily owned guns for recreation. And as recently as 2005, a strong plurality thought only police officers should carry guns in public. That's really not that long ago. And so this is an important story, more, I think, in the sense of its explanation of this shift in attitudes about guns, and it tracks nicely with the shift in judicial attitudes about guns that we've discussed, Armando's discussed, about the creation of, after, took 200 years for the judiciary to come around to saying, oh yeah, there's an individual right to carry arms, to go about your daily life armed, and to totally decouple it from anything remotely related to militia service and get rid of that part of the Second Amendment. That is a new development, although people point to it because they've been harping on Second Amendment rights this whole time. People think that this was something that the founders had in mind or had established, or this is the way things were going to work into the future as far as they were concerned. And that's highly questionable at best. But this is another aspect of it, convincing people that armed self-defense in daily life is a real thing that is necessary, a real thing that the founders intended, and something that actually helps make a difference and improves lives. And there's just no data for that. At the heart of this campaign for the hearts, minds, and holsters of America has been an article of faith that the NRA and its allies have preached since at least the 1990s, that people enhance public safety by carrying guns to defend themselves. Economist, maybe, John Lott first developed this more guns, less crime theory in his 1998 book of the same title, and has since popularized it via frequent legislative testimony and op-eds. The NRA has deployed Lott's work to beat back calls for new curbs on guns and their use. In the aftermath of the Sandy Hook Elementary shooting, when NRA leader Wayne LaPierre made his infamous assertion that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, he was tapping into the already well-seeded notion that hidden guns at arm's reach of their private owners increase public safety. It's a powerful, seductive idea, particularly to Americans who favor personal liberty over communitarian ideals. It's also completely wrong, according to a new analysis of nearly 40 years' worth of crime data. In a new working paper published on June 21st by the National Bureau of Economic Research, academics at Stanford Law School ran that data through 4 different statistical models, including one developed by Lott for more guns, less crime, and came back with an unambiguous conclusion. States that made it easier for their citizens to go armed in public had higher levels of non-fatal violent crime than those states that restrict the right to carry. The exception was the narrower category of murder. There, the researchers determined that any effect on homicide rates by expanded gun carry policies is statistically insignificant, so nothing happens at best. While other studies conducted since 1994 have undermined Lott's thesis, the new paper is the most comprehensive and assertive, debunking the more guns, less crime formula. For years, the question has been, is there any public safety benefit to right-to-carry laws? And now that is settled, said the paper's lead author, John Donahue. The answer is no. Donahue and his co-authors looked at crime data from 1977 to 2014, both nationally and in 33 states that implemented shall issue concealed carry laws during that period. The bell goes off. KITM listeners know exactly what they're talking about, right? The statutes are the handiwork of the NRA and ALEC, which has by now successfully lobbied politicians in all but a sliver of state capitals to relax their standards for issuing permits to carry concealed guns. Shall issue states, which Donahue refers to as right to carry, or RTC, require that concealed carry licenses be granted to anyone who meets basic criteria. Unsurprisingly, they accept permit applications at a higher rate than may issue states, where authorities have greater discretion to decide who is fit to go about the world armed. Since lowering the bar for concealed carry licenses gradually leads more people to get those licenses, Florida alone has 1.8 million people permitted to carry concealed guns, and Pennsylvania and Texas each have around 1 million. And because more guns in public is supposed to reduce crimes, then we should expect states to see less crime as shall issue laws kick in. The Stanford team found precisely the opposite. 10 years after the adoption of RTC laws, they write, violent crime is estimated to be 13 to 15% higher than it would have been without the RTC law. How do you like that? Now, there have been prior studies that have shown similar things, but like as they said, this one being the most comprehensive. Luckily, science is widely accepted as the basis for sound policy decision-making in this country, and we should be well on our way to a corrective at any moment. Ha ha! We have 1 minute to get that straight. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And a quick skim of the rest of the article, and there's quite a bit left here, leads me to believe that I think we move on from here. Although many of you might be interested in picking up the article to read the nitty-gritty of the methodology and to try to get some details, because, of course, you do hear frequently that violent crime is down nationally. And you used to hear that quite a lot, actually, from people who were advocating for gun safety issues and say there's less need for carrying in public, even if you're right about these things. But as it turns out, they're not right. But what does that mean in terms of the previous reports that violent crime was down? Maybe we'll explore a little bit of the next part of the article just to get a little fix on that. Prior assessments of right-to-carry statutes came earlier in the waves of shall-issue laws that first swept states in the 1980s and mid-1990s. One of those was a well-known 2004 report from the National Research Council that also poked holes in Lott's conclusion, but could not say definitively which way right-to-carry tilted crime rates because there weren't yet enough years of data to sift. Because the Stanford team was able to look at what was happening in states where expanded carry had been in place for a decade or more, it reached much stronger estimates of the effect of shall-issue laws on crime. The Stanford team suggested that the increased carrying of guns could have contributed to rising crime through several means. As more law-abiding residents arm themselves, so might the criminals in the same communities, rather than the other way around. Lawful gun permit holders, the researchers theorize, could contribute to a street-level arms race by bringing more weapons into public, where they are more likely to be lost or stolen, making their way to the black market. And that is happening, although they're not necessarily being carried there by the armed public. They're being looted in great numbers straight out of the gun stores. It's almost, as I say on Twitter frequently, as if guns attract crime rather than repel it. The more that people became aware that their environs are filling with guns, their perceptions of society could become colored by fear and anger. What do you know? Thus leading them to more readily become violent themselves. I wasn't surprised to find violent crime went up, Donahue said. You'd expect guns to contribute to violent crime, because that's generally speaking what they're for. The Stanford findings fly in the face not just of the NRA's message, but common understandings of crime trends over the last 2 decades. By national measures, violent crime has fallen dramatically after peaking in the early 1990s, and that drop has largely coincided with the expansion of the freedom to carry concealed guns. So, Lott and others are eager to point to declining national crime numbers as evidence for their theory, or at least to blunt concerns that more guns in public would lead to widespread bloodshed. The problem with drawing a connection between the rise of concealed carry and the drop in national crime rate, as Donahue and his co-authors point out, is that crime has not fallen equally in all parts of the country. This is an interesting flip side to the electoral college problem that we have, where the concentration of blue votes in what look on the map like tiny blue islands and seas of red. They're actually much more heavily populated. More people live and vote there than do in the prairie and scrub brush occupying most of red map America. So keep that in mind here. The problem is that the problem with Lott's assertion that crime rate has dropped and that coincides with concealed carry is that it hasn't fallen equally in all parts of the country. Instead, the decline in violent crime has been most pronounced in states that maintained strict control over the right to carry guns, like New York and California, those hellholes of crime. And you hear it all the time, or I saw it a lot in the gun fail stories, particularly in certain kinds of stories when citizens of, well, often southern states, but more gun-oriented states would travel to New York City and bring their guns with them and get themselves in trouble. But they thought they were doing the right thing. One, because, of course, they've become convinced that people should have reciprocal gun carry rights in every state. But two, that they're going to the hellhole of New York City, where everybody's a criminal and is going to murder you. So you've got to bring your gun. And in fact, that's where the crime has dropped the most. So, New York and hellhole California, socialist, terrorist landscapes. When other states decided to make it easier for residents to pack firearms, they appear to have missed out on reductions in crime of the same magnitude. Did you get that? Violent crime has been, the decline in violent crime most pronounced in states with strict gun laws, New York and California among them. When other states decided to make it easier to get guns, they appear to have missed out on reductions in crime of the same magnitude. Yes, in raw terms, crime declined in those right-to-carry states as well, but not nearly as much as it could have. Examining statistics from the U.S. Census Bureau and the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting data, the authors estimate that states with stricter concealed carry laws saw crime fall by 42% from 1977 to 2014. That drop is more than 4 times greater than the just 9% decrease seen in right-to-carry states. In conducting their analysis, the Stanford researchers wanted to make sure that it was differences in concealed gun laws and not some other factor, diverging economic fortunes or police staffing, for example, that sent crime plunging in some places but not others. To find out, the team projected what would have happened in right-to-carry states had they not relaxed concealed carry standards, accounting for differences in demographics, policing, and economic growth. Here, too, the team was able to run calculations that were not possible in the 90s and mid-2000s when the academics who first subjected Lott's theory to scrutiny had significantly fewer years' worth of data to crunch. The Stanford findings rest on 2 statistical methods with obscure-sounding technical names: panel data analysis and synthetic controls analysis. Panel data essentially tries to break down complex social phenomena, crime being very much one of those, by studying their smaller, more easily measurable components like incarceration rates, police staffing levels, poverty, income, and population density. Should I be spending the time explaining these things? I guess I'm committed to it now. Synthetic control analysis allows researchers to compare data recorded after the introduction of a change, like right to carry law, with projections based on what might have happened had the change never occurred. The synthetic controls projection is based on demographic data and outcomes in demographically similar places. Different researchers make different judgments about which factors have the most power to drive crime up or down. Rather than rest their analysis on a single set of variables, the Stanford team ran their 37 years of crime data through 4 different panels. Their favorite, called DAW, one developed by the nonpartisan Brennan Center, the panel John Lott used in More Guns, Less Crime, and a fourth favored by a pair of gun researchers named Carlisle Moody and Thomas Marvel. That's a real name. Projections made with all 4 panels showed that states with right-to-carry laws would have had even greater decreases in violent crime had those places not loosened their gun laws. The panel data gave no hint that anything good was coming from the right to carry, Donahue said. And then some examples. And I think we'll just leave off here, although that is relatively close to the end. But you'll want to see the charts in front of you as you read the rest of it. So anyway, I just thought very interesting, good points, not likely to be swallowed easily, of course, by the gun rights crowd, who will say, I don't care about your data. I care about the anecdotes, all of a sudden, of me having a gun and feeling better because I do. Anecdotes aren't data when you're telling them gun fail stories, but anecdotes are all that matter when it comes time for them to refute your actual data. But no surprise there. All right, other stories, I think, also occupying lots of time out there and well worth it at that. Let's see. Quite a few different things we could add to the mix here. Let's go back to a story I had to jump away from yesterday. I had just brought up Bloomberg's report about this, and now there's a Vox non-splainer, because it's difficult to explain, out there about it too. I provided you with the article yesterday, but let's take a quick look at what it has to say. Trump tried to undo North Korea penalty. Remember this one? Contrary to U.S. account. We began with this one, and this was the one where the Treasury Department announced new sanctions against North Korea, and Trump then tweeted that Treasury just announced these new sanctions, and I am ordering the withdrawal of those sanctions. Here's kind of what actually happened with all of that. President Donald Trump last week, remember all of that, intended to reverse sanctions imposed on 2 Chinese shipping companies accused of violating North Korea trade prohibitions. Chinese shipping companies. He wants to reverse sanctions on them. Until officials in administration persuaded him to back off and then devised a misleading explanation of his vague tweet announcing the move. Trump stunned current and former government officials Friday afternoon with a tweet saying he had, quote, ordered the withdrawal of additional large-scale sanctions against North Korea. For hours, officials at the White House and Treasury and State Department wouldn't explain what he meant. They didn't know or were busy trying to talk him out of it. I see. The president, in fact, intended to remove penalties Treasury had announced the day before against 2 Chinese shipping companies that had helped Pyongyang evade U.S. sanctions, according to 5 people familiar with the matter. Now, why would you do that? I have no idea. But, well, I mean, the idea is, I guess, I have no idea is shorthand for only corrupt reasons could possibly explain this, quite honestly. Trump hadn't signed off on the specific measures before they were announced, but had given Treasury discretion to decide some sanctions as it saw fit, because he doesn't know how to decide such a thing, according to one person familiar with the matter. Later Friday, in the wake of Trump's tweet, the administration sought to explain away the move with a statement, initially requesting no attribution to anyone. I guess then nobody would print it that way. That said the penalties against the Chinese companies hadn't been reversed, but the U.S. wouldn't pursue additional sanctions against North Korea. There were no additional North Korea sanctions in the works at the time, according to two people familiar with the matter. And yet there was Trump tweeting, "Oh, sanctions on North Korea, eh? Well, I'm going to undo those." Except there weren't any. The people asked not to be identified in order to candidly describe last week's events and the administration's attempt to provide a cover story for the president. White House and Treasury communications staff didn't comment on Tuesday. The episode unfolded in the hours before Special Counsel Robert Mueller submitted his final report to Attorney General William Barr, and it demonstrated Trump's penchant for stumbling into policy via tweet, a practice that often catches his own government off guard. On Thursday, he announced in a tweet that the U.S. should recognize the disputed Golan Heights as Israeli territory, surprising State Department officials. In December, he said in a tweet that he would withdraw U.S. forces from Syria against the advice of many top national security officials. Senator Cory Gardner, a Colorado Republican facing re-election in 2020, blasted the Trump administration's handling of North Korea sanctions at a Foreign Relations Committee hearing Tuesday morning. "We now have sanctions that are being waived by the president after Treasury, by law, issues them," he said. "This body ought to be growing more and more frustrated," I say suspicious, "with the U.S. continuing to change our policy while Kim Jong-un sits back and continues to develop fissile material, nuclear weapons, without doing a doggone thing. Without doing a doggone thing, except watch the United States change its negotiating position." The sanctions on the two Chinese shipping companies were the subject of a National Security Council principals meeting last week, according to two people familiar with the matter. Robert Blair, a national security aide to White House acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, who I thought had been promoted to permanent, warned that he didn't think Trump would support issuing the measures. But National Security Advisor John Bolton, a North Korea hawk, disagreed and argued he knew Trump better than Blair, the two people said. I'm glad to see him be wrong. After the sanctions were announced, Bolton publicly applauded the move. "The maritime industry must do more to stop North Korea's illicit shipping practices," he said in a tweet, adding that everyone should take notice and review their own activities to ensure they are not involved in North Korea's sanctions evasion. The next day, Trump's tweet shocked former Treasury officials who said it risked undercutting the entire U.S. sanctions effort only to benefit North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's regime. President Trump likes Chairman Kim, and he doesn't think these sanctions will be necessary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the idiot, said in a statement after the tweet that didn't explain which sanctions Trump had withdrawn. One of the two Chinese shipping companies, Dalian Haibo International Freight Company Limited, is doing business with the sanctioned North Korean company, Treasury said in a statement on Thursday. The other, Liaoning Danxing International Forwarding Company Limited, was sanctioned for operating in the transportation industry in North Korea, Treasury said. That's a quote. That's what they were doing. Okay. The U.S. also updated a North Korea shipping advisory on Thursday, adding dozens of vessels that are believed to have engaged in ship-to-ship transfers of oil with North Korean tankers or exported North Korean coal in order to evade sanctions. Victor Cha, a North Korea expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, who was considered to be Trump's ambassador to South Korea, said the Foreign Relations Committee hearing at Trump's tweet reinforces the worst tendencies which have actually led us to where we are now. I guess I see why he didn't become the ambassador. The North Korean leader made clear what mattered to him in Hanoi, where Trump and Kim met in February for their second summit. He had his time with the president, and the one thing he focused on was sanctions relief, which oddly is what Russia focuses on when they meet with the president or his people as well. So there you have that story. As I said, there was a Vox non-splainer out about it too. Here's what I mean. Let me find it here. It's been 4 days since Trump's confusing North Korea tweet, and we're still confused, writes Alex Ward there at Vox. And so, I don't know. What do I do with that? It's a Vox explainer that just says we're confused. A new report shows the Trump administration, quote, devised a misleading explanation about it. I didn't really feel like I got the full sense of what that part of the story was from Bloomberg. On March 22nd, Trump tweeted that he would terminate additional large-scale sanctions on Pyongyang that he claimed had been announced that day. That led to widespread confusion because there hadn't been any sanctions issued that day. Some thought maybe Trump was referring to sanctions announced a day earlier on 2 Chinese shipping companies for continuing to trade with North Korea, which members of his administration had already discussed with reporters. Sarah Sanders seemed to confirm that interpretation when she told reporters shortly after Trump's tweet that President Trump likes Chairman Kim and doesn't think the sanctions will be necessary. Now, that in and itself would have been controversial, and it was, as Trump would have openly gone against what his administration thought was best to please North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. But then the situation got murky, really murky. A few hours later, multiple news outlets, including the Washington Post and Fox News, reported that the administration had actually been planning to apply additional large-scale sanctions on North Korea, just as the president had initially implied. That made it seem like Trump chose to block a larger round of sanctions on North Korea devised by his administration and opted to do so publicly. And now it's possible that that explanation isn't correct either. On Tuesday, Bloomberg reported that Trump actually was referring to the sanctions, we just read that, on the Chinese shipping companies all along. According to the report, though, Trump's staff persuaded him to back off and then devised a misleading explanation for his tweet. Even more damning, there were apparently no planned large-scale sanctions on North Korea in the works, which still means no one has any clarity about what Trump actually meant by his cryptic North Korea tweet last week. That, to put it mildly, is not good, especially since U.S.-North Korea nuclear diplomacy is arguably Trump's most important foreign policy initiative. The Trump administration's chosen strategy for dealing with North Korea's nuclear program has long been to place sanctions on the country until it has no choice but to dismantle its arsenal. Should Pyongyang do that, Washington would lift the sanctions in return. Last month, Trump met with Kim Jong-un for a summit to haggle over the nuclear program's future, and many expected them to make a deal, but they came nowhere close to striking such an accord, which made Trump's March 22nd tweet such a surprise to North Korea watchers and even members of his own administration. It's the latest example of how American foreign policy is increasingly driven by Trump's whims, and that has proven catastrophic during the U.S.-North Korea nuclear negotiations. This episode is a case in point. First, no one still really knows what Trump meant with his North Korea sanctions tweet. Second, he's an idiot, is what he doesn't know what he's talking about. That's all. Second, it's completely possible that the administration lied to the media and the American public about what he meant. And third, this will only confuse North Korean officials who follow statements by the U.S. government closely to divine what its policy really is. What makes it all worse is that Pyongyang is just as confused as the rest of us. I guess they have no special insight into what this idiot has to say. Well, maybe that brings us to this next article here. I thought it was an interesting one to see appear in the pages of Foreign Policy. Stephen M. Walt writes this one. Do they have a little explainer at the bottom about who Stephen Walt is? He's the, professor of international relations at Harvard University. So if you're looking to talk to him, bribe your way in and ask him about this article. America's corruption is a national security threat. Yes, it is. Donald Trump is one symptom of a wider problem that's making the United States weaker on the international stage. Stephen Walt is willing to say on the international stage. And there's a photo that illustrates the piece, by the way, which is a great choice by the photo editor. The very dumb, vapid, barely in focus face of Donald Trump in the foreground. The focus being on Jared and Ivanka making their way out of the same room full of officials here. It's the East Room of the White House. Ivanka staring blankly into the distance, but Jared, like, side-eyeing toward Trump and with a smirk on his face, like, I love it. I'm going to continue to make so much money out of this. And it's very illustrative. If they've been paying attention, Walt writes, Americans have received some rude wake-up calls in recent years. What unpleasant news do these messages convey? The country is a lot more corrupt than Americans realized. And it's not just because everybody's bribing their way into schools. Since 2016, of course, concern for corruption has been riveted on the sleaze show that is the Trump administration. As the New York Times revealed last fall in a remarkable investigative report, which everybody had forgotten about, apparently, U.S. President Donald Trump's life since boyhood has rested on assorted frauds, tax scams, and shady business dealings, and his recent conduct suggests high office did not alter the family's modus operandi. Since becoming president, Trump has breezily ignored the emoluments clause of the Constitution, handed taxpayers a multi-million-dollar bill for his frequent trips to his own properties, appointed his his daughter and son-in-law to sensitive positions for which they are manifestly unqualified, and surrounded himself with a host of shady characters. Former campaign chairman Paul Manafort and several other campaign advisors have been convicted of fraud or other crimes. Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn has been convicted of lying to the FBI, and Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt and Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke both resigned over ethics violations. Labor Secretary Alexander Acosta is under fire for the plea deal that gave the wealthy and well-connected accused sexual predator, he's convicted. Why do we say that? Jeffrey Epstein, back when Acosta was U.S. Attorney in Florida, and Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross continues to serve despite serious conflicts of interest. I got an article on another piece of his troubles as well. Instead of fulfilling his campaign promise to drain the swamp, Trump dug it wider and filled it deeper. Small wonder that the United States has fallen out of the ranks of the top 20 least corrupt nations, according to watchdog group Transparency International, and is now considered a country to watch by that nonpartisan organization. But the problem is in fact far more serious than Trump and his entourage. Consider some other recent scandals. Are you ready for this? Example number one, the 2008 financial crisis. To some extent, the 2008 financial crisis is a study of hubris, where self-styled masters of the universe convinced themselves that they had devised financial instruments that had reduced the risk of a panic to minuscule levels. But the crisis also exposed systemic corruption inside key financial institutions. It wasn't just a few crooked mortgage brokers offering lots of bad loans. It also involved serious abuses by ratings agencies, investment banks, government-backed lenders like Fannie Mae, and even some academic economists. And by the way, I would add to that list even large swaths of the judicial system. If you read David Dayen's book, Chain of Chain of Title, right? I have the book over here somewhere. I should look it up, but I have a screen in the way these days. Okay. But that's actually a huge omission from this. But okay, we get the idea. Well, at least we know about it. At least we can take comfort in the fact that the people responsible for cratering the world economy were held accountable and got punished, right? Of course, that's not nearly true. Example number two. Here's an interesting one to throw in. The Boeing 737 MAX. The more we learn about the second recent crash of a Boeing 737 MAX aircraft, the more disturbing the tale becomes. While a final determination of the causes of two recent crashes has yet to be made, it seems increasingly clear that Boeing rushed the new plane to market, downplayed the need for additional pilot training, and used an increasingly cozy relationship with the Federal Aviation Administration regulators to win approval for the plane. The world seems to have woken up to the conflicts of interest here. The United States was the last country to ground the plane after this month's crash, and Ethiopian authorities chose to send the black boxes for analysis to France rather than the United States. We did discuss that. Example number 3, we'll try and squeeze in before we take our last break. The latest college admissions scandal, because there have been others in the past, but this latest one makes the grade here. It's no secret that admission to elite institutions of higher education isn't the pure meritocracy that universities try to convey. Being part of an alumni family, like my own, is a big plus, see? And it seems to help a lot if the parent gives the school a big donation. Forgot to do that. At just the right time. But last week's revelations that wealthy parents and celebrities were colluding with William Singer, a professional admissions counselor, and a bunch of corrupt coaches and administrators to get those kids into school, well, it surprised everybody. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue on with this. And when we left off, we said that the latest college admissions scandal surprised everybody. But the reality is it probably surprised nobody. But as the way Walt puts it here in the piece, which I tried to rush through, is a little clearer here. Last week's revelations that wealthy parents and celebrities were colluding with this so-called admissions counselor and a bunch of corrupt coaches and administrators to get their less than fully qualified kids into elite schools by falsifying test results or passing them off as gifted athletes was still an eye-opener. It was the methodologies that opened eyes. There was also more evidence, as if any were needed, that of the corrupting role big-time athletics play in the life of American universities. Don't even get me started on that subject. I would ask you not get me started on that one either, until all things are settled for my kids here. Although I will say that one of the big discovery, it was obvious already, but the big discovery for him going through all of this process was aiming at some elite schools himself, and not Harvard, Yale elite, but some top-level schools, and finding that having excellent grades and excellent test scores, of course, that's never enough all by itself. Had some pretty good extracurriculars out there, but it wasn't a big club joiner at school, and that was a huge, that's actually a huge drawback, as it turns out, at least for our little corner of the universe, with National Honor Society stuff, which used to be sort of an automatic thing back in my day. You got the grades, you're on the honor roll all the time, you're going to be in the Honor Society. This time they wanted signed proof of leadership positions held in various organizations. And we actually go on and get signatures from the advisors. So it was very weird. I had never seen anything quite like that one. Anyway, but it was an eye-opener for him watching how little interest there seemed to be in admitting students to academic institutions strictly based on their academic accomplishment. And there are plenty of other reasons to admit people to school, absolutely, and I don't downplay any of the serious ones. I guess what was really irking him was that academic institutions, for instance, almost never at the higher levels, at the elite levels, were interested in, they did nothing to recruit good students per se, but I guess they didn't have to. Good students were flocking to them. So I suppose there's no point in doing that work. But yet they were, making all sorts of arrangements for top athletes. That's really what he was worried about there, was the idea that the acquaintances of his in high school who had posted no serious accomplishments academically were breezing through the college admissions period, which is a stressful heartbreaker of a period in an academic student's life, and were walking away with early admissions, and in fact multiple offers of early admissions from various otherwise elite academic institutions, but that no one would ever dream of doing the same for someone who was merely bringing a strong academic record to an academic institution. It was very odd. And more on that perhaps in the future. But no surprise to anyone, obviously. Just sort of watching him come to the realization that was true was interesting and a little disappointed. Anyway, we continue with the foreign policy article here. And let's not forget that a number of venerated institutions in American life, including the military and the clergy, have been rocked by serious scandals over the past several decades. It's a long timeline, but okay. In addition to the horrifying history of sexual predation and cover-ups in the Catholic Church, the U.S. military has been wrestling with a serious problem of sexual assault in the ranks, a wide-ranging procurement scandal that rocked the U.S. Navy, and the discovery in 2014 that 34 missile launch control officers conspired to falsify scores on proficiency exams. I think I missed that one. Yow. What these and other episodes remind us is that corruption isn't confined to the current White House, to a few bad apples like Bernie Madoff, or a handful of industries with unsavory reputations like real estate. On the contrary, it seems to be a growing problem in all walks of life, to which I would add another major omission, how could you have missed the Me Too months that we've had here in terms of the awakening, to the fact that so much of the world runs on the corruption of sexual improprieties, to use the broadest possible umbrella for all sorts of wrongdoing. I mean, rapes, okay? Plus sexual assaults, plus some other stuff that doesn't quite fit under that umbrella, but is wrong and prevalent nonetheless. How much of the world runs on pressuring people into allowing sexual assaults in the name of getting ahead economically? That's a major omission from this. We'll add it. And I'm sure that the author would say, indicative of part of the problem, this eludes me, maybe because I'm male. But okay, we remembered on his behalf. So let's add that. Where do we leave off on this? Why does this matter? Oh my God. Well, okay. For starters, corruption is inherently inefficient. So the economists among you will dislike that. Instead of resources going where they are most needed, it's a bad transition from Me Too. But okay, maybe that's why he left it out. Seems too flippant. Instead of resources going where they're most needed, they get diverted into bribes, payoffs, kickbacks, and other shady arrangements, plus large settlements, which aren't shady for the same reasons. And when the wealthy and powerful use connections to get jobs or contracts or get their kids into college, that means that more deserving and talented people get excluded and less qualified people end up in positions of authority. The more common such practices become, the more honest and law-abiding people will be tempted to follow suit just to keep up. And once corruption becomes endemic in a society, rooting it out becomes more difficult, if not impossible. And actually, the previous sentence here, the more common such practices become, the more honest and law-abiding people will be tempted to follow suit just to keep up, reminds me of a story we read, some years ago now, about, wasn't there a study asking people probably in the securities industry and finance, whether they thought breaking the rules or breaking the law was actually a necessary part of their job, essentially. I can't remember exactly how it was phrased, but I do remember reading the article. I'm sure it exists in the archives of Pocket somewhere. See whether we can dig that up just to remind myself of what we were talking about at that point. Making matters worse, though, is the demand for regulation that corruption tends to foster. Oh, really? Interesting. Let me hear about this one. More and more people cheat and trust erodes. Responsible officials will try to corral corruption by imposing more rules, laws, oversight procedures, and regulatory mechanisms. One sees this phenomenon everywhere, including at universities, where efforts to prevent all sorts of misconduct are making it nearly impossible to do anything efficiently. I didn't really think I was going to get into a libertarian anti-regulatory argument with this, but I could see how it leads to this. But the taproot of this problem is the fear that we cannot trust anyone to act properly without strict guidance and suffocating levels of bureaucratic oversight. Sadly, such fears are far from groundless. That's an interesting place to end up. It's not the end of the article. There's more, but that is pretty interesting. And, it's relatively true, right? I mean, in the last couple of days, I've noticed people discussing, was it Senator Gillibrand's proposal, among others, to crack down on the availability of opioids, painkillers, in order to try and combat the scourge of addiction. And it was immediately followed up with people, angry people who say, look, I have chronic pain. I don't know anything about their cases, but pointing out I have this chronic pain and I can't be limited to 10-day supplies or whatever it is that they were proposing of opioids. As difficult as it is to deal with the fact that people are out there abusing them, people who are using them properly and need them can't be, inconvenienced like this. And that's a mild way of putting it, according to what I was reading from folks who need access. But anyway, that was one minor example. But regulatory responses are fairly common, even from supposedly anti-regulatory Republicans. They'll, throw that out the window in order to be gimmitarian about anything at the drop of a hat. And then they'll outlaw hat dropping. Corruption and other forms of elite malfeasance, we continue, also nourish populist anger. When elites go to great lengths to game the system and are increasingly seen as out of touch and unaccountable, it is hardly surprising that ordinary people who've been playing by the rules become so angry that they will put their faith in anyone who promises to shake up the system. Such sentiments help explain the otherwise surprising popularity of a candidate like, this is interesting to, I guess we see where he's coming from, Bernie Sanders, or the rapid rise of straight-talking politicians like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. At least they give her the benefit of calling her straight-talking here. Ironically, it has also played a key role in Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. Ironically, that's what most listeners thought you were going to go to first there, Stephen, but okay. Which proved that you can fake integrity, and if you can, you've got it made. I correct my sentence there. Over the longer term, rising corruption threatens America's soft power, and especially its reputation for competence, to say the least. Shining city on a hill, American exceptionalism, yada, yada, right? Other countries are more likely to follow America's lead when they believe the core institutions of U.S. society are run by people who know what they are doing. And when foreign governments have confidence that information provided by U.S. officials is accurate. But when grifters rule the roost and privileged elites use their current positions to hog even more for themselves, their offspring and their cronies, our core institutions will function poorly, and other states will lose confidence in our ability to deliver as promised. To be sure, the United States still ranks relatively low on most indices of corruption, and it's a far cry from those unfortunate places where corrupt practices are almost a way of life. But we Americans are not nearly as pure as we pretend, or as concerned about the problems we ought to be. And as long as Donald J. Trump is alligator-in-chief, life in the swamp will go on as before. Very interesting. thought-provoking for the conclusions that he draws and the directions he takes. And so, therefore, worth our time, even if we wouldn't have written the same article. So, okay. I had mentioned that I had more on Wilbur Ross. Short thing here. I have the tweet of Jennifer Schutt, who covers Congress's budget and appropriations process for CQ Now, Congressional Quarterly Now, and Roll Call, tweeting the other day that Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross has apparently declined an invitation, that's a very nice way of putting it, to testify in front of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee that determines how much funding his department gets, which is ordinarily not only an invitation you cannot refuse, but an annual ritual. That's how oversight, in the absence of huge, glaring problems that require emergency oversight, Congress considers itself to have done its oversight duty in the absence of scandal when it receives the testimony annually of the cabinet secretaries in favor of their department's preferred budget items. So here we have a screen grab of the comment of Vice Chairman Pat Leahy, Senator of Vermont, on Secretary Ross declining to testify before the Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee of the Senate Appropriations Committee. The Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Commerce, Justice, and Science on Tuesday announced an annual hearing to review the budget for the Department of Commerce. Just your regular routine one. They weren't even calling him in for discussion of his particular problems. Giving no public explanation, Secretary Ross declined the subcommittee's invitation to appear at the hearing, as department secretaries traditionally do. Appropriations Committee Vice Chair Pat Leahy on Wednesday commented, Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross was supposed to appear before Senate Appropriations Subcommittee next week for an annual budget review hearing. He has declined the subcommittee's invitation. That's a shame. I was looking forward to asking him why he misled me during his last appearance 1 year ago when he asserted that the Justice Department was the one who made the request to include a controversial citizenship question on the census. That was false. It was Secretary Ross who first pressured a reluctant Justice Department, and 2 courts have since declared that the Secretary's attempt to add the question was illegal. Secretary Ross, you're not an investment banker anymore. You serve the American people, and part of your job is to be accountable to Congress and the American people. What do you have to hide? Well, I'm strongly worded, but very traditional. I don't think it's going to move Ross at all, but it should be pointed out that even routine, traditional appearances before congressional committees are dependent on some of that freedom from regulation that Stephen Walt was so excited about a few minutes ago. Just those are the norms, and you're not supposed to be willing to accept the shame that goes along with ducking your responsibility, except if you're extremely rich. Are you really going to care? So anyway, how's that for indicative of how the Trump administration is likely to respond to requests for testimony from the Judiciary Committee? It's not even worth considering whether or not they're going to do this voluntarily. You should just go straight to the subpoenas, and if that's not traditional, well, then who cares? Anyway, they're going to refuse those subpoenas as well, so you might as well, get to the point. All right, let's see. A few other items that we can fit in before wrapping up for the day. This one I thought was an interesting headline. I saw it tweeted by yesterday from Noah Bierman at the LA Times. What's behind all those executive orders Trump loves to sign? Not much. Well, it's a signed document, and it's always worth examining the official-looking things that Trump flashes around to make it look like he's doing something, especially if it turns out he's not. A seated President Trump handed commemorative pens to his wife, daughter, and 8 others who hovered around his desk, then theatrically held up for the cameras the latest executive order bearing his oversized signature. He had done, quote, something that people have wanted presidents to do for a long time, a triumphant Trump told the applauding military families who packed the White House East Room. We will now ensure that you have better access to federal jobs. Huge. Everyone was waiting for that one. Yet 11 months later, it's clear that the 4-page document he signed in May did no such thing. What do you know? Now, it was reported. It's too late to take it back, right? But it was reported. The order provided no money, created no policies, and added no hiring authority. It merely required federal officials to post notices on their websites and draft reports about an order signed a decade earlier by President George W. Bush, which allowed agencies to waive competitive hiring requirements for military spouses in some circumstances. In other words, Bush did this thing, and Trump has signed an order saying you got to put a notice about it on your website and draft a report about what George Bush did 10 years ago. That's what presidents have been trying to do for decades, and one did. And I am going to raise awareness of the fact that someone else did it by saying no one ever has and saying I did. The substance mattered little, however, for a president who relishes pomp and shows of executive action unchecked by Congress. Signing ceremonies have become a hallmark, a way to convey accomplishment for a man who asserts he has done more than any president in history. The Times reviewed 101 executive orders Trump has signed since Inauguration Day and interviewed experts, advocates, and administration officials about their effects. Many were geared toward favored political constituencies, including veterans, blue-collar workers, and evangelical Christians. Few moved policy significantly. Generally, the orders created committees or task forces, demanded reports, or pressed for enforcement of existing laws. Trump's boldest unilateral actions, the ones that have provoked the most vigorous objections to his use of presidential power, were not carried out through executive orders. He did initially sign 2 executive orders to fulfill his campaign pledge to ban all Muslims from entering the country, but courts struck both down. A third version, revised again to pass court muster, was written as a proclamation. It was upheld by the Supreme Court. Trump's recent efforts to circumvent Congress to pay for a southern border wall, now the subject of another court challenge, is based on his February 15th declaration of a national emergency. The president's executive orders are usually more modest, though Americans wouldn't know it from the ceremonies the White House stages. Many orders seek action from cabinet secretaries, something Trump could easily accomplish with a phone call. You don't really need an executive order for a lot of this stuff, but it makes for a good show, said Elaine Kamarck, a Clinton administration veteran who was the director of the Center for Effective Public Management at the Brookings Institution. He gives out pens, which is really sort of ridiculous, she added, noting that past presidents reserved that tradition for signing momentous laws like the Civil Rights Act. White House officials argue that Trump's orders focus agency leaders on his priorities and that ultimately some have had broad impact, including the reduction of regulations across the federal government and the expanded availability of less expensive health plans that don't offer a full set of benefits. The formality of a written order, they say, can command attention across government. The question is not whether Trump's rhetoric aligns with the legal language in the orders, the White House said in a written response to questions about the orders. Rather, the statement added, it's what they have accomplished, and they have done a lot. That's the statement they issued. They have. We say so. The Times review shows a different picture. A few of Trump's orders have led to changes in policy. Many, however, have proven more ceremonial than substantive. A couple of bullet points here. First, at least 18 of the 101 orders created new task forces, councils, or committees. Among them was an infrastructure council that disbanded within a month. Members resigned in 2017 after Trump's qualified criticism of white supremacists who marched in Charlottesville, Virginia. He issued 2 orders related to his unfounded claims of widespread voter fraud. One established a commission, the other disbanded it after bipartisan criticism. At least, next bullet point here, at least 12 included language such as encourage or to the extent permitted by law, underscoring the president's lack of authority to make sweeping change without help from Congress. Next, at least 15 revised or curtailed Obama initiatives, notably the orders overturning environmental regulations. Those made for some of Trump's most consequential actions, even as they demonstrated a major drawback of executive orders. That is, that they can be fairly easily undone by a successor. Also, courts have blocked some environmental rollbacks, so he's really good at getting things done, or whatever. Next up, at least 43 called for agency reports or reviews, including one on historically black colleges and another on retirement savings rules. A few in this category led to significant changes, such as Trump's order sharply shrinking the Grand Staircase Escalante and Bears Ears National Monuments in Utah that Presidents Clinton and Obama, respectively, had established. And last bullet point here, at least 5 related to members of the military, veterans, and their families. 2 called for plans and task forces on mental health and suicide among veterans. 1 established an accountability office at the Department of Veterans Affairs. A 4th, is that a 4th or 1/4 of the number that he's issued? This is a weird way to pick back up. A 4th purported to create a job training program for veterans to enter the U.S. Merchant Marine, but it duplicated an existing military-to-mariner program. Okay, I guess that really should have been part of the last bullet point. It complements what we're doing, said Coast Guard Lieutenant Amy Midgett. In several cases, Trump has made broad claims about the impact of his executive orders that have proven untrue. Can't believe it. He's repeatedly claimed that 2 of his orders require American-made steel in federal pipelines. In reality, they simply encouraged federal agencies to choose American companies for the product. The order Trump signed on Inauguration Day, quote, to ease the economic burden, unquote, of President Obama's health care law was similarly toothless. Yet another told federal education officials to follow existing laws respecting local and state boards' independence. That one about rolling back Obamacare was one we discussed extensively on the show and said, we said the same thing. It's toothless. Trump's 100th executive order, signed Thursday in an East Room event complete with a string quartet, followed up on a promise he made earlier in the month to a conservative conference, promising to force colleges to support free speech. That was kind of dumb. Remember that one? Trump called it historic and groundbreaking. Experts who read the text afterward said the ultimate impact was uncertain, given that public universities must already follow the First Amendment, and it simply instructed private colleges to comply with their existing policies. An official who briefed reporters beforehand struggled to explain the order and how the administration would enforce it. Some of the orders seemed to have little purpose. One replaced the White House Rural Council with the Interagency Task Force on Agriculture and Rural Prosperity. And 2 renamed a Financial Fraud Task Force and a Council on Physical Fitness. How interesting is that? Wow. Another, one of the 5 related to the military, was the order for employing military spouses that simply promoted an existing program. It demonstrated that for beneficiaries, executive orders can be a mixed blessing, bringing attention to issues but inviting complacency that the issues have already been addressed. There was definitely quite a bit of excitement out there about the military spouses order, but what I was personally concerned about was that excitement leading to a check-the-box mentality, said Jennifer Aiken, an applied research analyst for Blue Star Families, a military family organization. Time to get our music running here. Aiken said the order brought needed attention to the issue but failed to address bigger obstacles such as poor child care options for military spouses. Another favorite of Trump's are his Buy American orders. After signing his first one in April 2017, he claimed at political rallies that it would require Keystone XL and Dakota Access Pipeline to be built with American steel. It did not. The order stated a broad goal and required the Commerce Secretary, who's asleep, of course, to write a report. How's he done on that? Signing a second such order earlier this year, he insisted at a White House ceremony that the first was having an incredible effect on jobs for steelworkers. The second order, to encourage agencies to use U.S. products to the extent consistent with law, has had no more impact than the first. Well, it goes on at some length. With more of this stuff, I encourage you to read it on your own, but I encourage you to do so after listening to the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy up next here on Netroots Radio with Justice Putnam. Here's what he's got on tap for you today. Eric Holder wants to know exactly when Trump thought America was great. We have some idea about that. And as women continue to leave the GOP, 187 House Republicans voted against the bill to close the gender wage gap. Republicans asked the NRA to help them block protections for abused women. And guess what the rest of the world
Daily
is up to?
Co's
I'll tell you
Radio
more after this.
On netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
Start in Texas, where a county commissioner apologized for saying that the first Latina elected to head the state's most populous county should, quote, speak English, after she held a bilingual, which included English, news conference about the massive chemical fire there. Much more, of course, as always, coming up next on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy.